start.
Okay. Yep.
Greetings. Welcome to session 2, folks. Deanna.
Yes, so welcome again, everyone, to session 2 for this Australian Symposium on Programmatic Approaches to Assessment. And the session 2 is on university level initiative. So my name is Diana Saragi Turnip. I'll be facilitating this session today. So I'm delighted to welcome you to a conversation about how different universities are approaching programmatic approaches to assessment at institutional level. We have 3 excellent contribution lineup from the University of New South Wales, Professor Gary Velan and myself, from Monash University, Associate Professor Tim Fawns, and from Edith Cowan University, Dr. Janica Jamieson. So each of us will give a short presentation to share our context and key insight. After the presentation, we'll move into a Q&A and open discussion where we can engage more interactively. As you are listening, please feel free to post your question in the chat box at any time. We'll gather them for discussion, or you can raise your hand later on to contribute directly into the Q&A. So without any further ado, I'll pass it on now to Professor Gary Velan.
Thanks very much, Deanna. It's a pleasure to join you all today, and very happy to talk to you about the current UNSW approach to program level assessment as a catalyst for curriculum transformation. And Deanna's been a real driving force in this work, and there's several others who are here today who have contributed, particularly Priya and Bora, that I can see in the chat. So let's move to the next slide. So there is a major change in progress at UNSW, which is categorized as a holistic curriculum transformation, with about 500 or more programs and over 5,000 courses undergoing this change by 2028. And a key part of that change is a move to program level assessment, but it's also associated with program simplification and a move to a flex semester calendar from the current 3+ calendar. So major changes going on, but rather than lifting and shifting courses from the current calendar to the new calendar, it's associated with a curriculum transformation. And program level assessment is a key component of that transformation by providing a scaffold for alignment of outcomes, integration of feedback, and monitoring of progression. Next slide, please. So I've been leading a programmatic assessment working group as part of our student experience assessment and feedback working group at UNSW over the last couple of years, together with Heather Crawford from the Faculty of Business. And last year, the group produced a white paper on programmatic assessment for learning, or PAL, a very user-friendly acronym, which provided a conceptual model and a vision. And this year, we've produced a white paper for an institutional-wide model of program level assessment, which is scalable and aligned with a revised assessment policy and procedure. And programmatic assessment for learning remains an extension to program level assessment for competency-based or milestone-driven programs. So over the next 2 years, program leads and course conveners will work together with Pro-Vice Chancellor Education resources and professional development resources to develop program level assessment plans for each program and specialization within the university to ensure compliance with Texas requirement that all learning outcomes are assured at the time of graduation. Program level assessment is a key component of that. And once the flex semester is implemented in 2028, all programs will operate within that environment. And the overall aim is to enhance student engagement and success. So there is one program level assessment strategy, but there are two models. So program level assessment is the baseline. It's to be applied across all coursework programs. There's a roadmap towards it with 5 design principles, which Deanna will talk to you about shortly, and it's required for compliance with Texas requirements. Programmatic Assessment for Learning, or PAL, is a more transformative model, and we're currently using case studies as pilots with a longitudinal focus, and it's being implemented experimentally for each program, particularly in those professional programs with accreditation requirements. So the benefits of program level assessment is that alignment of course learning outcomes to specialization learning outcomes and program learning outcomes and graduate capabilities is assured. It will help to reduce duplication of assessment, thus reducing the burden of assessment for both students and staff. It will help to make students' progression visible through scaffolding of tasks relating to each specialization or program learning outcome, and it will facilitate conversations between program and course teams to ensure coherence. The diagram to the right of this slide is a heat map showing alignments of assessment tasks to specialization and program learning outcomes by course. This is using a tool called MAPI, produced by Fiacre Rougeau, who is a Nexus Fellow at UNSW. Next slide, please. So this is the implementation roadmap for program level assessment. We're at the moment in the readiness phase, where we're establishing alignment, particularly in getting institutional endorsement of program level assessment, aligning with the new assessment and feedback policy, identifying champions and program and specialization leads, and completing a self-assessment rubric, which Deanna will show you shortly. We'll then move into the design phase, which will involve mapping using tools such as the MAPI tool we showed you on the previous slide, and we'll try to identify unnecessary redundancy in assessment tasks and plan for assurance of learning at key stages in each program or specialization, which will involve secured assessments. We'll then move on to the delivery phase, streamlining assessments as appropriate and using secured assessments as appropriate. And from 2028 onwards, once the flex semester calendar is implemented, we'll be monitoring and evaluating the implementation of program level assessment. So I'll now hand over to Deanna.
Yes, so Gary has taken us through UNSW structural roadmap for curriculum transformation. But change isn't only about structure and policy, it's also about culture and how we work together as program teams. Structurally, we are mapping and sequencing curriculum, building whole of program assurance of learning, and embedding feedback-rich design. But culture matters just as much. We are moving from individual ownership to shared custodianship of assessment supported by program teams. We are shifting focus to assessment for learning and breaking down siloed approaches to design. It's not a straight line, it's a scaffold. Structure gives us coherence, but culture makes the change sustainable. To embed program level assessment at UNSW, we define 5 principles. First, alignment, ensuring assessment map from course learning outcomes through to program outcomes and graduate capabilities. Second, scaffolding, structuring tasks progressively with feedback built in. Third, capability progression, making visible the growth of student skill across the program. Fourth, rubric alignment, shared rubric for consistency, fairness, and evaluative judgment. And fifth, progression support. Early stage tasks and checkpoints to provide feedback and timely intervention. Together, this principle form the baseline expectation for all UNSW programs, flexible across discipline, but consistent enough to ensure coherence. So evaluation is embedded from the outset. So we are aligning to UNSW 15 dimension of program level assessment rubric, a framework for tracking progress. While formal evaluation is still ahead, our intended focus is on feedback coherence, outcome mapping, workload, and progression feasibility. This framework sits within UNSW's total strategy. So transformation is research, refined, and shared. So it informs iterative rollout, showcases, and case refinement. And in some programs, we are pilot the full programmatic assessment for learning model, as what Gary has said, where longitudinal progression tracking is essential. So program level assessment doesn't scale because of a model on paper. It scales because we scaffold it through a whole ecosystem of support. At the university level, leadership aligns framework and policy. Faculties coordinate readiness, sequencing, and priorities. Program leaders map curriculum, streamline assessment, and use the shared rubric. And our champions, such as Nexus Fellows and embedded leaders, model practice and mentor peers. This all backed by practical support like toolkit, rubrics, radar charts, clinics, showcases, and the PVCE portfolio support. So it's not just a top-down reform, it's a scaffolded system that helps teams own the change locally. So to wrap up, program level assessment at UNSW is not just another initiative. It's UNSW infrastructure for curriculum transformation. It provides what we need at scale, which is alignment, feedback, progression, and feasibility without over-engineering the system. So it's the foundation that let us implement, scale, and refine reform across the university. And as we move toward 2028, our focus is clear: coherence, capability, feedback, and progression. That's what program level assessment is building for UNSW. Now I pass the mic to Tim.
Hello, thank you so much. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're approaching the PAIR project at Monash, which we're calling Programmatic Assessment and AI Review. I'm an academic lead for this PAIR project. I want to thank my other academic leads, Claire Palermo and Ari Seligman, and I want to thank Jacqueline Trebilco, who's the project lead, and the wider Monash PAIR team, who are amazing and representing a lot of work, a lot of thinking by them, and also the Monash community who are engaging in this project, which is kind of including almost everybody. I also want to thank my Edith Cowan University colleagues, Rowena Harper, Katrina Stample, Amanda Taylor, and Janica Jamieson, who's going to speak after me, because we've been exploring programmatic assessment at institutional scale together in a collaborative research project, which has been very, very helpful. So a little bit of context. Monash is a massive institution. It has almost 80,000 students, it has 10 faculties, and it has campuses in different countries. And it is a behemoth which we are trying to move towards more programmatic approaches to assessment. And it's interesting to compare and contrast it with Edith Cowan, which is a smaller institution and is going about things a different way. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a second. But the kind of cross-fertilization of those lessons, I think, is proving really useful and interesting, and it's good to have another institution to talk to about all this stuff. Also, I was involved in writing the TEXA Assessment Reform Principles for an Age of AI, led by Jason Lodge, and that talked about the need to think about preparing students for a world with AI, and also making sure that we have an approach to assessment security that helps us have credible qualifications. So those principles kind of have been a big driver across the sector towards more programmatic approaches, where we can scaffold in approaches to building capabilities that help us deal with AI and a society that has AI infused within it, but also thinking strategically across programs about where we might secure assessment. And that forms a bit of a foundation to this project. You'll probably be familiar with the TEX's request for information in 2024, asking for action plans, credible action plans, in fact, from institutions about how they're responding to AI. And that's what PAIR came out of for us. And then we had roundtables where we talked as a sector about ways forward. And I just want to highlight the value of institutional collaboration in this space, and I'll come back to that as well. So the PAIR project involves putting all courses at Monash, which is about 500 courses, across all of our 10 faculties and our international campuses, through a process in a 2-year time frame where we try to look at and increase the programmatic aspect of the way we design curriculum and implement assessment. Our approach at Monash is in co-designing the approach with faculties. So not saying that there's one particular approach to going programmatic, but trying to get each faculty to come up with a way that will work for them and a timeline that will work for them, which my understanding is it's a bit different from Edith Cowan, which is trying to come up with the coherence first and then move people towards that, although both of us have a little bit of a spectrum there as to how much influence the centre has and how much happens as we move along. We started with a pilot, so we started with 3 courses from different faculties, trying out a PAIR process, and really important that we learn from that process as we go so that we can refine it over time, because it's impossible to get it right at the start. And PAIR is really a catalyst for ongoing programmatic work at Monash, so we won't solve the whole problem in this 2 years, but we will learn a lot that will help us to keep going forward. So I've listed a whole lot of different types of work that are involved, and I don't want to go too much into it, but there's a lot of planning, design, and implementation around clarifying and setting goals, awful lot of mapping and spreadsheets and different models of going programmatic involved. There's a lot of establishing goals and processes and progression monitoring at different levels, so unit, course, school, faculty, and institution, trying to figure out what different roles are. What is a chief examiner or unit coordinator doing in this space? What is a course director doing? How do people transition from one type of configuration of a role to another? What teams do we need? Clusters of different teams that can kind of come together to learn from each other without having to bring everybody together. And what projects do we need to implement in order to get the different aspects of AI integration and programmatic assessment? How do we reconfigure communication channels so that it's easier for teams to work together? And what policy is getting in the way, etc. Lots of different types of evaluation, lots of ways of supporting development. And there is some really important conceptual work, which I'll go into a bit more in a second, about developing a broader assessment vision so that we know why we're doing this work and where Monash is going. We needed to establish and adapt different principles for programmatic assessment, which I'll talk more about. And we have these things called learning circles and challenge conversations to try and help us think, and I'll get into that as well as, and the research projects that we're doing. There's also discursive work. So we need to define what we mean by programmatic assessment, what we mean by AI integration, how we think about them. We need to define the projects and the direction. We definitely need senior leadership buy-in and presence to get everyone to believe that this work is something that Monash believes in as well, and to keep momentum going. We need clear vision for various aspects of education, and we need ongoing kind of guidance and space for people to talk about it. So all of that type of work underpins this project, and it has an awful lot going on. we haven't seen a lot of institution scale programmatic assessment before. So a lot of this we're sort of having to figure out what types of work are involved as we go. Quickly, some of the challenges involved so far appear to be about people having different conceptions of what the actual work of going programmatic is, and what it means to become more programmatic. And we're tolerant to quite a lot of different conceptions in our approach, but it's still a challenge because different people might be talking about different things at different times. The Monash approach really has been to take off and then start building the plane, because we felt that we needed to pilot things and try things and have this kind of iterative approach to developing the project, rather than trying to figure it all out in advance, partly because of the size of Monash and the difficulty of getting everybody to sign up to the same path in their different contexts. And of different groups are building slightly different planes. So the centre, the people in the centre who are supporting this project have to kind of deal with those different planes that the different faculties and different courses are building. Existing knowledge is a challenge in that people have existing knowledge of programmatic approaches, which may or may not get in the way of new approaches to programmatic approaches. The big thing is AI is definitely the harder part of this. We've got programmatic, we've got courses becoming more programmatic and trying to integrate AI into assessment at the same time. And we found that the programmatic focus is being more successful than the integration of AI. And part of that is it's actually difficult to do them both at the same time, go more programmatic and integrate AI. It might be easier to integrate AI once you've already got a programmatic structure to your curriculum. So that's one of the challenges. Pair's not the only thing going on for people, so they're also doing other types of curriculum reform. And the big risk, I think, here is that once you've gone through all the big effort of the pair project, where you take more programmatic approaches to your curriculum, you think you're finished, but actually there's ongoing work. It doesn't really end. So I think that's a bit of a challenge for people in times of exhaustion. Boosters include people, the really good people that we have and the strong communities we have, where there's clear direction and buy-in from leadership that pushes people forward. If you can build these approaches on sound educational structures and expertise, people who know what they're doing and how, it makes a huge difference, whether that's at course level or unit level or faculty level or institution. You definitely need patience and determination to keep going. We need to build a repertoire for different programmatic moves through lots of sharing and talking, like this kind of event that we're at right now. And we need a way of learning and iterating that is kind of structured. We need to see that we're actually making progress by demonstrating the gains that we're making and how programmatic approaches are helping students, for example. And we need lots of collaborating beyond teams and institutions. So like working with Janica at ECU, actually not being by yourself and trying to figure it all out independently. So this kind of event that we're in at the moment is amazing. Thank you for organising it. A really quick deep dive into some conceptual work. We needed to adapt the principles of programmatic assessment, which has been used in healthcare, because different faculties and different courses have different contexts, and we needed to adapt Hienemann and al. To our Monash context and programs. And I'm happy to share a link to what we did there, but we grouped it into these three themes that we think are important for any course: continuous meaningful feedback, mixing assessments, and equitable, credible decision-making progress. So we think those are the things that are in common. There are a lot of answers we don't have, so we set up learning circles, which are groups of experts that talk about unresolved issues and try to create guidance in the absence of clear guidance. And these challenge conversations, and I'll put a link in the chat as well for them, where there's a question that we don't have the answer to. So we get some experts involved and we have a conversation about things like, how can we respect Indigenous knowledges in responding to the challenges of AI in education? Really hard questions like that. We're not trying to answer them. We're just trying to move the conversation forward and generate more questions. And then we're doing some research. We have a Students in AI project in partnership with Deakin, UQ, and UTS, which is looking at students' uses and perspectives. And I can give a link to that too. doing various research, and I was just at the Cradle Symposium on AI and assessment this week, where lots of people are trying to figure out AI and assessment. We're doing this research with ECU on programmatic approaches at scale, which is also looking at the mess of institutional change. And that research is important for gaining lessons out of what we're trying to do, because certainly what we're trying to do is not perfect. And interestingly, the research interviews are kind of like an educational intervention in themselves, where people reflect on how they are going more programmatic, what the challenges are. So look forward to seeing more come out of that, which is a beautiful segue onto Janica's. I just realized I've not been actually moving this forward. Sorry. Which is a beautiful segue, and I'll post links to these in the chat, to Janica's presentation, which does look at the research that we've been doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. So, great. Okay, so hi everybody. My name is Janica Jamieson, and it is a pleasure to be here today at the symposium. Already so much great discussion, and I've had several kind of aha moments. So I'm based in Boorloo, Perth at Edith Cowan University, or ECU, in the Master of Nutrition and Dietetics. And as Tim has said, and building on what he's already talked about, I'll be sharing early insights from the ECU Monash University Research Collaboration on adopting programmatic assessment across the diverse disciplines at these two universities. I'm on Whadjuk Noongar country in the southwest of Australia today, and this research was conducted on this country and also in Melbourne on the Barnarong lands of the Kulin Nation. And I recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders as the first teachers and researchers of these lands, and I pay respect to elders past and present and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. So as Tim already outlined, the research team, it's an amazing team, cross-disciplinary, and I'm very fortunate to be the person who gets to share these early insights with everybody today. So Tim's already talked about the pair from Monash University, and at ECU, the institution-wide transition to programmatic assessment is being led by Deputy VC Education Professor Rowena Harper, and we're calling it programmatic learning to really focus or refocus on the learning aspect of assessment. This approach is integrating the systems of learning activities, feedback, and a course, which others might call a program level assessment for progression decisions. At our institution, we call a program a course, making sure there's that alignment with course learning outcomes, which has already been described to that program level assessment earlier. So Rowena gave a keynote presentation at HERDSA recently, where she outlined the current situation with Gen AI and learning in higher ed. And in the last part of the presentation, she described what the programmatic learning approach is going to look like quite broadly at ECU. So given that Rowena has already outlined that very well, I won't be covering that here, but I will drop, there's a QR code there, but I'll also drop the links to that presentation in at the end as well. And the second QR code is the website that provides details on the ECU programmatic learning approach, and I'll also add that into the chat. So as Tim said, the ECU approach is different from what Monash has done in that last year there was a pilot project that brought together all the schools, which may be faculty equivalents in other universities, and also the service areas, and I participated in that. And it was a series of workshops across the year to explore what it would mean to move to a programmatic assessment approach for the institution. Now, this year, a small group of approximately 18 courses have been selected or nominated to redesign to the programmatic learning approach, and they will be rolling out from 2026. And then over the next 2 years, all the courses at ECU will be redesigned and move towards the programmatic learning approach. So this research explored both what Tim has talked about with Monash and also the pilot and the redesign activities happening this year at ECU. So why did we want to explore this topic? Well, I think anyone who's familiar with the published literature on programmatic assessment will know that there's been the focus on health professions education, which is unsurprising because that's where the root of the approach sits. But it has often focused on those single discrete courses or programs or a part of them. So little is known about how programmatic assessment translates across those disciplinary boundaries outside of health. And so this research sought to look at both how programmatic assessment was adopted across the institution, but also across the breadth of those disciplines. So to answer this question, we used a qualitative research approach. We have conducted 40 interviews across ECU and Monash, and participants have represented lecturers, unit coordinators, course directors or leads, associate deans of teaching and learning and designers and advisors, and other service areas. And there's been quite a breadth of disciplines. So we've had education, business, nursing, arts and humanities, performing arts, technology, and also the health sciences. So data analysis is currently underway. So what I'm going to be presenting today are the early insights that we're gaining from the data. So there's emerging codes and themes. Data analysis is being guided by a systems theory, which we think can really help to unpack the depth of the data and the changes that have been occurring across the two institutions and within them. So the first site is around the parameters or the boundaries that shape higher education. And I'm sure as people who work in these institutions, you're very familiar with what these are and the influences they exert on what you do. And the transition to programmatic assessment is both shaped by these boundaries and it pushes back on them as well, which are the other systems which we all work in. And it questions why things are done a certain way and how they could be different. So programmatic assessment is a bit of an irritant to these boundaries. And the interactions are quite nuanced. So what we're seeing so far is that, we have TEXA, the higher education regular, is both the driver for the change with their call to action with the longitudinal assessment, and also in some ways a constrainer with governance. Professional accreditation bodies seem to be perceived by the research participants as a hindrance to shifting to programmatic assessment because of their misalignments between the professional body accreditations and what the university wants to do, which I think this has been a big question in our institution, really kind of begs the question of when are these professional accreditation bodies and their standards sort of being updated or reviewed, and how are they in sequence or out of sequence with the big conversations happening. And as this quote shows, it's the sector both nationally and globally which itself can be a constrainer as to how we change the way we do things with our students moving fluidly between the institutions. And of course, Gen I is the big disruptor and has brought both the capacity for the change. And in saying that, that's recognizing that many people were already moving or had been doing programmatic assessment or had been wanting to do that. But it's really been that catalyst to that movement. And it is also shaping our teaching and our assessment practices as we do them. There are also parameters surrounding the faculties or the schools within the institution, so how business occurs, and this touches on those cultural practices and sort of how the higher education institutions can have the same policies and procedures but have them understood and applied differently across the different areas. And there are also discipline boundaries that are reflecting the professional identities that we construct for ourselves and the roles we take up in our institution, teachers, researchers, education designers, etc. And that is feeding into the adoption and the reaction to programmatic assessment, while also pushing back on those as to what they mean for who we are and what we do. So this leads into this idea of meaning making, which is how people or groups of people interpret and reinterpret the narrative around programmatic assessment within their own framing and constructs of themselves, their group and others. So that individual and that group think. So this is the process about how people understand, learn and adapt programmatic assessment to their own setting and their own work. And this is where their professional identities seem to be being negotiated and renegotiated about how they shape their engagement with programmatic assessment and what the actual outcome of the work, so the teaching and assessment, will be looking like. So how people or groups adapt programmatic assessment to their own context. So the same context, but the different meaning. And as you can see with this quote from one of our participants, there's a need to provide a guiding framework, which is what Monash are doing, ECU calling them propositions, but it gives people the space to adapt this to their own settings without losing the intention behind it. And this really dovetails into the leadership approach and the locus of control that people have in their work. And there's something different about programmatic assessment from many other changes that have occurred in higher education. And this is likely rooted in the fact that programmatic assessment isn't just a change to our practice, it's a change to our fundamental beliefs and our guiding values. That's that philosophical shift. It's already been talked about today. And these are our internal dialogues that shape how we understand and approach education. And as this quote shows, it takes it's quite complex, this change. It takes time, it takes some cognitive work. Tim talked about those learning circles, which are a great way to kind of engage with these ideas and help people shift along. So it's not just the practicalities of design and curriculum and tasks, it's also about taking people on this journey of change. So on that note, to take an entire institution from historical business as usual to programmatic assessment is at the core a change management process. Acknowledging that there are many different change process theories out there, this data so far is telling us that that groundwork is really key to prepare people and resources, that mapping the curriculum, developing the visualization tools, familiarization with the ideas, all of those tools and resources needed for the change, and how long that takes people will be based on their previous knowledge and experience, their professional identity, their philosophical viewpoint. So some people are already leaning towards that constructivist subjectivity approach. It seems to be adopted a little bit quicker and easier. And again, you can see this quote around this familiarization process. So acknowledging that actually there's some complexity to programmatic assessment that takes people a little bit of time to engage and learn from. And people took the lead as champions or change agent, and they had a really pivotal role in endorsing, promoting, and translating these ideas and this work to the people around them. Another key part is the extent to which people believe they have control versus believing other people or external forces are controlling what they're doing, that locus of change. And when talking about change, people describe the fatigue with the constant years of change, COVID, new learning management systems, Gen I are a few that are coming up. And then, so I think we need to also recognize that people are tired, they've had a lot of change, they might be excited about programmatic assessment, but there is a bit of history there for them. And then there's also this recognition that programmatic assessment isn't quick, it takes time. And so giving it that time and that space for it to change. So across and within institutions, a common language was created, often, this seemed to be led by leadership, and so that everybody could be on the same page. But there's also recognition that this language that was created seemed to be easier for some people or some disciplines to access and relate to, while others needed a little bit more time. And you can see here this participant has talked about, starting with this core concept. So having everybody on that same page of what we're talking about. And this was aided by having a simplified message, so often taking those 12 principles and evolving them into a language that made sense for that institution. And ECU and Monash had different approaches to crafting these common simplified message, how they communicated it and what they actually were. But across the two universities, what you can see is that approach to simplifying, being consistent, communicating that in a really clear way was what aided that shared understanding for what the change was going to be about. So what has come through in the early analysis is that this shift to programmatic assessment was collaborative and inclusive. It often reached out beyond the typical bounds of how we work. So this could be with the teaching team, across teaching team, working more closely with the education and curriculum advisors or other service areas within the universities. This collaborative team approach also supported the shared understanding and was really fundamental to doing the design work. And this does make a lot of sense because programmatic assessment is that horizontal and vertical learning and assessment across a curriculum. And within the change process and the relationships, there were points of tension. These often related to the nuts and bolts of the design, but that with that collaborative space and the opportunity for discussion, they could be worked through. But I would say that this is an area that I think will unfold a little bit more as we do the data analysis to see what these points of tension were. And certainly resistance has come through with the change fatigue, the level of engagement and interest, which I've already talked a little bit about where that came from. Also, people talk about the workload stress and having overloaded. And interestingly, that continued kind of single unit thinking or course thinking of what people teach, that's their ownership over that. And there was a little bit of tension and resistance to moving towards having a shared ownership over the entire curriculum. And the final insight is that both universities took this guided approach to implementing programmatic assessment, which one participant described as support from the side rather than a top-down or a bottom-up approach. And that created a climate where people have the agency and the support to understand and move to programmatic assessment. Leaders were seen to be knowledgeable in programmatic assessment. They were engaged, they were role modeling, so they were in the room, they were at the tables, they had their hands in the work of designing programmatic assessment with their colleagues. They didn't dictate or set rigid parameters for thinking and design. They used those flexible guidelines. And this was all guided by the principles and philosophy as programmatic assessment. And there was a very sort of structured approach in that there was purposeful workshops, regular meetings, and in some cases there was also workload compensation. So people had some time bought out so they could actually do this work, or at least the intention for that to have happened. So wrapping up with a couple of practical insights that you could take away would be around being explicit with the internal and external boundaries and their influence, creating space for meaning making for yourself, your colleagues and your team, recognising that it is a complex change process, having those clear messages, investing in that shared language, and that leadership works best when they are involved and providing support to motivate and foster innovation. And then I've just got one final shout out for a new, which is not related to this research, but this is actually a network, and I did check with Priya, and she said I could sneak this in at the end of my presentation. So unrelated to this, but about programmatic assessment, some colleagues and I are setting up a professional assessment network for health professions education, PAN-HAPPY, and this is going to be exploring how programmatic assessment can work beyond medicine, reflecting the diversity of the health field. So I know many people here today are not going to be in the allied health or other health disciplines, but there is a LinkedIn page where you can connect and join the conversation, and there are plans for events next year where we can share and learn from each other. So it's not an exclusive group. Anybody who's interested in having conversations around programmatic assessment in the broader health disciplines is more than welcome to participate. Thank you.
All right, thank you to all the presenters. Yeah, we'll now open up for Q&A and discussion for the panel. So just a reminder, you can use the chat box, and I can see lots of like conversation down there already, and people start like asking question and answering in there. But if you have any burning question, you can raise up your hand and we'll give you microphone access as well. But to start, obviously in the beginning, we have a lot of discussion in the chat about HERDSA compliance requirement as well. Say, for example, Nalini asked about how we can maintain authentic elements like mentoring and portfolio while still meeting HERDSA compliance requirement. Priya raised the question of how to secure buy-in for more holistic progression decision, moving beyond pass or fail to competency-based approaches. So for the panel, how are your institution balancing regulatory compliance with more transformative elements of programmatic assessment, and what strategy are you finding effective for getting staff on board with this shift? Anybody? Like maybe Gary, we want to start first with this?
Thanks, Deanna. It's clearly a challenge, and I think Tim and Janica have outlined how a variety of approaches need to be embraced, because there is certainly no one size that fits all with regard to a program level approach or a programmatic approach to assessment. There will be resistance amongst people, as Janica correctly stated, because it's a complete shift in culture of how academia has been for over a century, which is that everything is based around a unit or course level, and there is often little consideration to the student's journey through their program. So I think, first of all, an institutional imprimatur is key, and with that institutional imprimatur comes the professional development required for staff in leadership roles in all schools and faculties, and then to align that with the work of course conveners and program leads.
Any thoughts from Tim or Janica?
So I always have thoughts, and I could talk for a long time on this subject, but balancing regulatory requirements with things that we've come to value in education is the task, really, and in a way, everything we've said is our attempt to try to do that by creating projects that involve structural change and development and talking and trying to restructure things so that we can actually know what's going on and be more strategic about it. I would say securing and assurance are important, but they need to be done in ways that preserve the educational and relational aspects of what we're doing. So we're trying to look at a range of different ways of generating and evaluating evidence of learning that are actually of the kinds of learning that we value and involve the kinds of educational relationships that we value. So there's no easy way to do that. And that's Monash is putting together this massive project that involves a whole lot of different people and a whole lot of ways of learning in order to try to do this in a non-simplistic fashion, because I think if we just do it in a simplistic fashion, we'll end up skewing things in a problematic direction.
Yeah. Any insight from you, Janica, or we can?
No, I think that was well covered.
Yeah,
there might be a few other questions.
Yeah, there are a few other questions. I might jump into Nalini's question on how do we balance the coordination of large-scale implementation while enabling pedagogical experimentation with this structure assessment framework, particularly for diverse disciplines from engineering to humanities. Especially now we are looking at the whole institutional approach. Maybe you can start with you, Janica.
Yeah, I do think it goes to what Tim also talked about, is not holding too tightly what you want people to do and sort of stepping back and thinking about maybe some broader guidelines or propositions, or also what Gary talked about, the framework, having those two options that people can also really engage with programmatic assessment of learning or that program level learning. So I think that's that probably creates the space, whereas if it's very top down and it's very directed exactly what people need to do, I think that would really stifle that creativity. And so I think getting a real sense of what is core to programmatic assessment is key to that.
Yeah. So what happened in a big scale here at UNSW, obviously what I can see, it's sometimes, also looking at it as an educational developer, it can be messy at a time. It's like maybe like a noodle kind of like situation, like it's all tangled up together. But then if we are looking at it all together, right, not only from top down but also throughout, that's why we have all of these different groups of people maybe doing all the different things within their program, like that's why we also at UNSW, we try to put in these champions through the Nexus program that we have. That Nexus program sitting within schools then will be able to like basically work together with people at the school level, at the program level, becoming champions of what as initiative of this curriculum transformation initiative that comes from the PVCE level, but then we are actually putting it to the school level as well. So I guess that cultural shift, it's sometimes it's a challenging situation as well, but like we are working towards it, like I would say that way. Anyone else wants to chime in on that?
I would also just jump in and say that we did programmatic assessment 10 years ago in our course, and at that time nobody knew what it was, and there were very tricky structural barriers to doing it in our institution. So one example is that we had a policy that you needed to have 2 assessments at the time, but one of our assessments was a portfolio with multiple pieces of evidence and feedback and intermediate sort of reviews, and nobody could kind of get their head around that. And so I just put a quiz in for the students. It was just a sort of when it worked, the system that we had at the time. And I think, you know, you have to be really pragmatic, because there's probably a lot of people here today that don't get to make the decisions about how their institution runs assessment. And so that would be the other point, is just, you know, kind of think really creatively and laterally and see how far maybe you can kind of push back against those and do what you can. Because I think any progress towards programmatic assessment is good progress, but you might not be able to do everything all at once, because we certainly couldn't do everything all at once either.
Yeah. Like, I mean, there are like a number of conversation down at the chat there about what makes programmatic assessment programmatic, right? While we are accepting this diverse interpretation, but not diluting the core principle. I know, Tim, you have commented in the chat. Maybe you wanna like give us some more insight on that for everybody?
Sure. So I don't know that I want to say we haven't diluted the core principles of programmatic assessment, because in what we've done is we've adapted the principles that came out of healthcare education to be a little bit more flexible, so that we could actually make them work in physics and in economics and every other discipline. And we're also diluting them in a sense by not saying that every course is going to meet all of these principles in some meaningful way by the end of pair. What we're trying to do is have these principles of programmatic approaches to assessment, which you might not call authentic programmatic assessment in the sense that it doesn't do all the things that programmatic assessment in healthcare would do, but it has these principles of kind of thinking about students across different units, and thinking about assessment as not being unit specific, but building towards a certain piece, and the idea of having feedback that connects people across different things that they're learning at different times, and all of these kind of principles as a way of saying, well, we might have diluted what you would call proper programmatic assessment, but we've found a way to make these principles more feasible and more meaningful to a greater diversity of contexts. And then we're working with teams as they find their own approaches to learn from that and to try and help others learn. So it's a sort of messier and more developmental space.
Okay, so to follow up, there's another question, right? So like, success means like competent graduates who have genuinely made their learning outcome. Then what do you see as a non-negotiable measure of success for programmatic assessment at your institution then? It's open for everyone.
So I know where Sean is coming from. We do need people to be able to do what we've said they can do at the end of our programs. But let's not forget that we weren't always amazing at knowing that before, and now it's becoming sort of more challenging. So if the only measure of success of an initiative like this is that we're fully confident about every graduate, that's a big ask. I think we need sort of more gradated measures of success. Are we moving in the right direction? Is this actually helping at all? Is this setting us up to continue to improve in the future? So for us, it's the PAIR project initially is trying to get a sense that programs are working at a more programmatic level so that they can be more strategic in their planning, and that they are integrating AI into assessment in a thoughtful way. And then as a general assessment qualifier for Monash, we need to look at the validity of assessment and how confident we are that students are meeting the learning outcomes, as not something that is a measurement of PAIR, but as a greater measurement of our progress at Monash, which PAIR is sort of setting us up to do, if that makes sense.
Any thoughts from you, Gary?
Thanks, Deanna. I think each institution will have their own measure of success. I think from a regulatory point of view, I think if we can put our hands on our hearts and say that we can warrant that all students who attain a qualification from our institution have achieved all of the learning outcomes to a satisfactory level, I think that's the baseline. And then improving the experience of assessment for students and staff is another major goal, and hopefully by making these changes we'll go some way towards achieving that.
Mm-hmm. All right. So there is another question there from Leanne R. Says she raised the point that separating secure tasks from feedback tasks can help integrity, but that the real challenge is building staff capability while also grappling with generative AI. How are your institution addressing the dual challenge of academic integrity and AI in program level approach to assessment? I'll start with you, Janica.
Yeah, such a good question. Look, I'm not one of the best placed to answer this because I'm not sitting at that high level within our institution. But I will say, I think that they are really grappling with the number of sort of like integrity, misconduct that's coming in now with AI. And so I think the intention is that this move towards programmatic assessment, where you know you can kind of look across the body of the work to make those progression decisions, is part of the solution. But I'm probably not the best person to answer this because I actually I sit within a teaching team, and so I'm not I'm just doing the nuts and the bolts of the teaching and of the programmatic assessment. So perhaps Gary or Tim might have a broader perspective.
Yeah, I'll go with Gary.
Sorry, I dropped out there for a second. Could you repeat the question?
That's okay. I'll repeat the question. Like separating secure tasks from feedback tasks that can help integrity. The real challenge is building staff capability while also grappling generative AI. So how your institution addressing the dual challenge of academic integrity and AI in program level approach to assessment?
Yeah, well, that's I think as Tim mentioned in his presentation, that's a very challenging thing to do. I think in the chat I saw that there was a post saying that programmatic assessment by its nature helps to assure integrity because each learning outcome is assessed in a variety of different ways longitudinally over time. which gives us greater assurance that students have developed the required capabilities to graduate, irrespective of whether they might use AI for some parts of some assessments and not for others. But a more holistic integration of generative AI into both our teaching practice and our assessment practice is, I think, an urgent challenge, but it's something that I am doubtful that any institution has truly mastered as yet.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, this is the end of our hours. We still have so many different, many questions in the chat. Definitely, like you will be able to connect with each one of us. Like I definitely will go through the question myself again and see if I can answer it in any other way later on after this conversation. Definitely, because it's hard to like do two things at the same time. But yeah, so that's that. Once again, thank you for all our panel, and thank you for every one of you in the session today for such a thoughtful discussion. So now it's our lunch break. So we'll resume the next session at 1 p.m. So please be back online a few minutes before we restart. So enjoy your break now. Thank you.